The announcement came not with fireworks or celebration, but with the quiet, measured tone of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the transitional leader of Burkina Faso, whose words carried more gravity than spectacle as he stood before the National Assembly, and calmly informed the world that geologists working under his administration had confirmed the presence of an estimated 100 billion barrels of recoverable oil reserves beneath the arid northern plains near the Oudalan and Soum provinces. A discovery that, if proven and responsibly harnessed, had the potential not only to radically transform the economic trajectory of the landlocked West African nation, but also to disrupt global energy geopolitics in ways few had anticipated. For a country long defined by poverty, instability, and decades of neo-colonial dependency on foreign aid, this revelation was met with a mix of disbelief, hope, suspicion, and deep caution, as Traoré, aware of the historical patterns that had turned similar resource discoveries into curses rather than blessings elsewhere on the continent, pledged that this time would be different. He stressed sovereignty, national control, and transparency, vowing to resist the gravitational pull of multinational oil giants that had, in his words, bled Africa dry and left its children thirsty. Traoré's rise to power in 2022 had already marked a bold departure from the status quo, a young military officer who seized leadership in a coup framed around anti-terrorism and anti-imperialism. He had quickly become a polarizing figure, seen by some as an authoritarian populist, and by others as a revolutionary voice in the spirit of Thomas Sankara, who had governed Burkina Faso with a radical anti-colonial vision before being assassinated. In 1987, the oil discovery, however, catapulted Traoré into an entirely new political dimension, giving him leverage, danger, and responsibility that few African leaders have had to balance so early in their careers. International reactions ranged from cautious congratulations to thinly veiled alarm, particularly among Western powers who had long regarded Burkina Faso as a marginal state of strategic interest, mainly as a buffer zone in the fight against Sahelian jihadism and a recipient of aid programs focused on stability rather than transformation. Overnight, that calculus changed. Suddenly, the world's energy diplomats, investment firms, intelligence agencies, and corporate boards were dusting off maps of Burkina Faso, analyzing logistics around pipeline routes, cross-border export feasibility, through ports in Ghana or Côte d'Ivoire, and wondering whether China, Russia, or Turkey had already made their moves to secure early rights or allegiances. Inside Burkina Faso, the implications were seismic not only economically, but socially and psychologically. For generations, Burkinabé citizens had endured underdevelopment, recurring drought, and the sense of being on the periphery of Africa's progress. Now, they were staring at the possibility of joining the ranks of OPEC giants, a dream that could lift millions out of poverty or plunge the country into civil unrest if mismanaged. Traoré, aware of this precarious balance, initiated what he called the New Sovereignty Initiative, proposing a national oil company owned by the people, governed by a technocratic board insulated from political interference, with revenues mandated to fund universal education, healthcare infrastructure, renewable energy investment, and military modernization to protect national resources without outsourcing security to foreign mercenaries. But the road ahead was treacherous. Within weeks of the announcement, delegations from France, the United States, Russia, China, and the Gulf states arrived in Ouagadougou, each cloaked in the language of partnership, each bearing gifts, low interest, loans, infrastructure packages, advanced drilling technologies, or defense cooperation agreements. Traoré's administration resisted the temptation to sign quickly, opting instead to launch an unprecedented public consultation process that included village chiefs, labor unions, women's cooperatives, and youth organizations, a political innovation that echoed Sankara's legacy and reinforced Traoré's message that Burkina Faso's resources belonged to its people, not to elites or outsiders. This move, while popular domestically, sparked tension abroad, especially in Paris, where political analysts worried that a once reliable former colony was slipping permanently out of France's sphere of influence. As Traoré pushed ahead, with the formation of a new regulatory framework, modeled partly after Norway's sovereign wealth system, but tailored to Burkina Faso's socio-political realities. Internal pressures mounted. Rebel groups operating in the Sahel region, sensing the stakes, began targeting survey teams and preliminary drilling equipment, leading Traore to deploy special forces to secure the perimeter while inviting regional allies from Mali and Niger to form a joint resource security pact, an unprecedented step toward economic solidarity that some dubbed Sahel OPEC. The African Union, long criticized for its passivity, began taking a keen interest, proposing a Pan-African energy oversight commission to help prevent corruption and foreign overreach in newly resource-rich states like Burkina Faso. Meanwhile, the Burkinabé diaspora, long scattered across France, Canada, and West Africa, began returning engineers, economists, agronomists, organists, and entrepreneurs inspired by the promise of national renaissance, eager to contribute to the shaping of a new era. Real estate prices in Ouagadougou doubled. Enrollment in technical universities spiked. For the first time in decades, young Burkinabés saw opportunity not in fleeing, but in staying. Yet, challenges remained colossal. Environmentalists warned of the ecological risks of mass extraction in fragile desert regions. Civil society groups demanded mechanisms for oversight. Opposition leaders questioned whether the military-led government could truly deliver equitable development without reverting to repression. Traore responded by inviting independent monitors from the African Development Bank and the United Nations to audit the exploratory phase, while launching a sweeping anti-corruption probe within the Ministry of Energy, a bold move that resulted in the arrest of 3 top bureaucrats and signaled his seriousness about breaking from the patterns that had doomed other oil-rich states. On the global stage, analysts began revising forecasts for oil pricing and supply chains. Burkina Faso, once a footnote in energy discussions, was now being factored into scenarios involving OPEC plus negotiations, green transition timelines, and strategic reserves. The discovery also intensified debates about the energy transition. Some Western voices called on Burkina Faso to leave the oil in the ground, citing climate commitments, while African thinkers countered that it was hypocritical for industrialized nations to demand restraint after centuries of carbon-fueled development. Traore walked a careful line, promising to invest oil revenues in solar and wind projects to make Burkina Faso a model of hybrid development, extracting with purpose. 8. Transitioning with vision. By year 2 of the discovery's announcement, the first barrels were being pumped under a state-monitored pilot project, with daily production modest but symbolically potent. Regional infrastructure began to take shape: roads, rail lines, refineries, all built with local labor under strict labor protections. Foreign investors, now subject to stringent Burkinabé law, began adapting. Some withdrew, unwilling to relinquish control. Others embraced the new rules, recognizing the long-term value of stable, locally embraced partnerships. Traore remained firm, often quoting Sankara, "He who feeds you controls you." He modernized the military but also built new schools. He refused foreign bases but welcomed African researchers, banned foreign consultants from drafting national policies, replacing them with local task forces trained by diasporic experts. As his popularity surged at home, Western media remained splitsome, painting him as a visionary, others as a populist, authoritarian. Yet even his critics had to acknowledge that Burkina Faso was no longer a passive participant in the global order. It was a player with resources, vision, and resolve. The oil discovery, while dramatic, became less about the oil itself and more about what it symbolized, the test of whether Africa could chart a different course when given the tools of transformation. Traore's leadership, imperfect and contested as it was, represented that experiment in real time, one where sovereignty meant not isolation, but negotiation on equal terms. The world watched as pipelines extended across Sahel's sands, not as veins of extraction, but as lifelines of possibility, if managed well. Schools bearing Sankara's name were filled with children learning petroleum engineering alongside Pan-African history. Women's cooperatives trained in revenue budgeting. The national anthem was sung with new confidence. Traore had discovered More than oil, he had discovered that the real wealth of Burkina Faso was not buried underground, but rooted in a population long denied its rightful claim to dignity and direction. Asterisk.